The sterile air of the lawyer's office was suffocating, a stark contrast to the vibrant, paint-splattered life I once knew. Across the polished mahogany table, my ex-husband Ethan sat with his arm draped possessively around his new fiancée, Chloe. Her diamond ring, a gaudy monstrosity the size of a robin's egg, caught the fluorescent light, mocking the simple gold band I had long since removed. They were here to finalize our divorce, the brutal severing of a decade-long bond. Ethan's smug, self-satisfied smile told me he thought he had won. He believed he was leaving me with nothing but memories and dust. Little did he know, in a few minutes, a different set of documents would change everything, turning his victory into ashes in his mouth. The conference room at Hayes, Thatcher and Dean was designed to intimidate. A single colossal slab of mahogany dominated the space, its surface polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the cold, indifferent Chicago skyline. It was Ethan's world, a world of sharp suits, silent judgments, and the quiet, brutal calculus of power. I felt like a ghost haunting it, a relic from a past he was eager to bury. My name is Isabella Rossi. At 34, I felt both ancient and unnervingly adrift. For 10 years, I had been Mrs. Ethan Hayes, a role I had tried to fill with grace, warmth, and a quiet passion for the arts. Now, I was just Isabella. And I wasn't sure who that was anymore. Across the table, Ethan radiated a smug confidence that was almost suffocating. At 36, he was at the peak of his career as a ruthless investment banker, a man who saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired. He had acquired me, and now he was liquidating me. His arm was a permanent fixture around the slender shoulders of Chloe Sterling, his 25-year-old fiancée. She was a vision of modern perfection, a social media influencer whose life was a curated feed of luxury travel, designer clothes, and aspirational quotes about living your best life. Her smile was bright, her eyes were vacant, and her presence was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. "So, Isabella," Ethan began, his voice smooth and condescending, the same tone he used when explaining complex financial instruments to people he considered his intellectual inferiors. "My lawyer, Mr. Davies, has the final paperwork ready. It's all very straightforward. We've been quite generous considering the circumstances." Mr. Davies, a man with a face like a clenched fist, pushed a stack of papers across the table. My own legal aid lawyer, the harried but kind Ms. Chen, gave me a small, encouraging nod. Generous was Ethan's word for a settlement so meager it was an insult. It would barely cover 6 months' rent on the tiny apartment I had found, a world away from the sprawling penthouse we had once shared, the one now occupied by Chloe. I looked at Chloe's hand, resting delicately on Ethan's. The diamond on her finger wasn't just a ring. It was a statement. It was a declaration of my replacement, a sparkling testament to my failure. I remembered the day Ethan proposed to me. We were young, backpacking through Tuscany. He had given me a simple, elegant gold band in a sun-drenched olive grove. He had promised me a life of partnership, of shared dreams. Instead, he had given me a gilded cage. "I just want to make sure you'll be able to manage, Izzy," Ethan continued, the old nickname a poisoned dart. "It's a big, scary world out there when you don't have someone taking care of things." The implication was clear. I was the fragile artist, the dreamer who curated museum exhibits, while he, the pragmatist, conquered the world of finance. He had fostered that narrative for years, slowly, methodically eroding my confidence. He'd belittled my career, calling it a cute hobby. He'd controlled our finances with an iron grip, giving me an allowance as if I were a child. He'd isolated me from my friends, subtly suggesting they weren't ambitious enough, that they were holding me back. By the end, I had started to believe him. I had started to see myself through his eyes, small, incapable, and utterly dependent. Chloe chimed in, her voice a tinkling bell of false sincerity. "Ethan worries about you so much. We both do. We just want you to be happy." I met her gaze. There was no sympathy there, only a cold reptilian flicker of triumph. She was the victor, the new queen of the castle. I was the deposed, exiled crone. I picked up the pen. Its weight felt immense, a scepter of my own surrender. My hand trembled slightly. I could feel Ms. Chen's concerned eyes on me. I took a deep breath, the sterile recycled air filling my lungs. I thought of the countless nights I had cried myself to sleep, the slow, agonizing death of our marriage, the final crushing blow of his infidelity. I had discovered his affair with Chloe, not through a stray text message, but through a tabloid photo of them on a yacht in St. Bart's, a trip he had told me was a boys-only fishing expedition. The public humiliation had been the final nail in the coffin. I focused on the signature line. Signing these papers wasn't just ending a marriage, it was admitting defeat. It was validating Ethan's narrative that I was nothing without him. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to rage, to throw the papers in his smug face. But what was the point? I had no resources, no fight left in me. The legal battle had already drained my meager savings. All I wanted was for it to be over. I wanted to walk out of this room and never see his face again. My gaze drifted out the window, past the gleaming skyscrapers to the sliver of Lake Michigan visible between them. I remembered a day, years ago, when Ethan and I had stood on the shore of that lake, skipping stones. He had wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "It's you and me against the world, Izzy." When had he decided it was just him against me? With a final shaky exhale, I signed my name, Isabella Rossi. No longer Hayes. The ink was a stark, black finality on the crisp white paper. I pushed the documents back across the table. "It's done." Ethan's smile widened. He had won. He squeezed Chloe's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. "Excellent. Well, Isabella, I wish you the best of luck, truly." The condescension dripped from every word. He stood up, towering over me, a monument to his own success. Chloe rose with him, a perfect accessory. They turned to leave, a golden couple walking off into their golden future, leaving me in the shadows of their shared triumph. As the heavy door clicked shut behind them, a profound silence descended on the room. It was the sound of the end of a world. I didn't feel relief, not yet. I just felt empty. A vast, echoing emptiness where a decade of my life used to be. Ms. Chen placed a gentle hand on my arm. "It's over now, Isabella," she said softly. "Now you can start again." I nodded, unable to speak. I looked down at my hands, resting on the cold, unforgiving surface of the table. They were bare, no ring, no papers, no future I could see. The victory was Ethan's. I was left with nothing, or so I thought. The walls of my new apartment were a depressing shade of beige, the color of resignation. It was a small, one-bedroom walk-up in Pilsen, a neighborhood vibrant with art and culture, but a universe away from the sterile luxury of the Gold Coast penthouse I had once called home. The faint smell of stale cigarettes and a neighbor's cooking, garlic and something unidentifiable, clung to the air. This was my new reality, a world of second-hand furniture, budget groceries, and the crushing weight of starting over from scratch. A week had passed since the divorce was finalized. A week of unpacking boxes filled with the ghosts of my past life, books Ethan had gifted me, photographs of a smiling couple who no longer existed, a single forgotten silk stocking of Chloe's I'd found tucked away in a drawer, a discovery that had sent me spiraling into a fresh wave of nausea and grief. I had thrown it away with a visceral shudder. My days were a monotonous cycle of job applications, curator positions, gallery assistant roles, even museum gift shop manager. I applied for everything, my carefully crafted resume and cover letters disappearing into the digital ether. My past experience, once a source of pride, now seemed like a relic from another person's life. The art world, like Ethan's world, was built on connections, and Ethan had made sure to methodically sever mine. I was an outsider looking in, my face pressed against the glass of a life I could no longer access. The rejection emails, when they came at all, were polite and impersonal. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." It was a gentle way of saying I was no longer relevant. This afternoon, I sat at my wobbly kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea and staring at another job posting. The rent was due in 2 weeks. My settlement money, after paying the first month's rent and security deposit, was dwindling at an alarming rate. Panic, cold and sharp, was a constant companion, a knot tightening in my stomach. That's when the buzzer shrieked, a jarring, ugly sound that made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. My few remaining friends knew to call first, tiptoeing around me as if I were a convalescent. I pressed the intercom button. "Hello?" A muffled voice crackled back. "Courier for Isabella Rossi." A courier? My mind raced. Had Ethan sent something? A final, gloating note. A box of my things he'd forgotten. My heart hammered against my ribs. I buzzed him in, my hand slick with nervous sweat. A few moments later, a young man in a crisp uniform stood at my door, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was embossed in elegant, severe lettering in the top left corner. Blackwood and Finch, LLP. I didn't recognize the name. It sounded old, prestigious, and expensive. My stomach plummeted. This had to be another legal bill, some unforeseen expense from the divorce that would wipe out the last of my funds. "Sign here, please," the courier said, holding out a digital scanner. My hand shook as I scrawled a jagged signature. He handed me the envelope and was gone, his footsteps echoing down the narrow hallway. I closed the door, leaning against it, the envelope clutched in my hand like a death warrant. It was made of thick, high-quality paper, the kind that whispered of immense wealth and serious business. I was terrified to open it. For hours I left it on the kitchen table, circling it like a wary animal. I cleaned the apartment, rearranged my books, did anything to avoid confronting the potential disaster it contained. Finally, as dusk painted the city in shades of grey and orange, I couldn't stand it any longer. With a deep breath, I slit it open with a kitchen knife. Inside was not a bill, but a single folded sheet of the same heavy paper. The letter was formal, the language dense with legal terminology, but a few words leaped out at me. "A formal summons to attend the reading of the last will and testament of our client, Mr. Arthur Blackwood." Arthur Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard of him. "As a named beneficiary." Beneficiary? My mind reeled. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error. There must be another Isabella Rossi in Chicago, one who knew a man named Arthur Blackwood, one who moved in circles where prestigious law firms sent out summons on cream-colored stationery. I reread the letter a dozen times. My name, my new address. It was all correct. The reading was scheduled for the day after tomorrow at 10 in the morning at their offices on Wacker Drive. A wave of suspicion washed over me. Was this some elaborate, cruel prank orchestrated by Ethan? It felt like his style, a way to dangle a false hope in front of me, only to snatch it away, just to watch me fall. He would find it hilarious. The thought made me sick. I almost threw the letter away. It was safer to assume it was a mistake, a cruel joke. To hope, to allow even a sliver of light into the suffocating darkness of my life, felt too dangerous. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford, but something stopped me, a flicker of, what? Curiosity, defiance. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if it wasn't a prank? I had nothing left to lose. My old life was gone. My professional life was in shambles. My finances were a ticking time bomb. What was the worst that could happen? I would go to this fancy law firm, be told there was a mistake, and leave, feeling foolish for a few hours. It was a small price to pay to extinguish the tiny, treacherous spark of what if. I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. I would go. I would walk into the lion's den, if only to prove to myself that I could. For the first time in a long time, a feeling other than despair began to stir within me. It was a fragile, unfamiliar sensation, but it was there. A sense of intrigue, a whisper of a possibility that my story wasn't over, that the final chapter hadn't yet been written. The lobby of the building on Wacker Drive was a cathedral of corporate power. Soaring ceilings, acres of polished marble, and a hushed, reverent silence that made my worn-out boots feel embarrassingly loud. I clutched the strap of my purse, the cream-colored envelope tucked safely inside, a passport to a world I didn't belong in. My outfit, a simple black dress I'd owned for years, the nicest thing I had left, felt woefully inadequate. The offices of Blackwood and Finch occupied the entire 80th floor. When the elevator doors whispered open, I was met with an atmosphere of old money elegance. The air smelled of leather, wood polish, and history. No bustling receptionists here. Just a single, impeccably dressed woman who greeted me by name before I could even announce myself. "Ms. Rossi, Mr. Finch is expecting you." She led me down a wide, carpeted hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men who looked like they'd single-handedly financed empires. My heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my ribs. This felt far too real to be a prank. The sheer scale of the place, the quiet, unshakable confidence it exuded. Ethan could be cruel, but his cruelty was theatrical. This was something else entirely. This was substantial. The woman opened a set of heavy oak doors, revealing an office that was larger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city and the lake. A man stood with his back to me, gazing out the window. He turned as I entered, and a gentle, welcoming smile softened the lines on his face. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of thick, silver hair, kind, intelligent eyes, and a suit that was probably worth more than my car. "Ms. Rossi, Isabella, thank you for coming. I am Alistair Finch." His voice was a warm, reassuring baritone. He gestured to one of two plush leather armchairs in front of a massive, uncluttered desk. "Please, have a seat." I sat on the edge of the chair, feeling like a sparrow perched on a throne. "Mr. Finch, I think there may have been a mistake. I received your summons, but I don't know anyone by the name of Arthur Blackwood." He sat down opposite me, his expression patient, understanding. "There is no mistake, I assure you. Please allow me to explain. Arthur Blackwood was my dearest friend and my most important client for over 40 years. He passed away peacefully last week." He paused, a flicker of genuine sadness in his eyes. Arthur was a very private man. A recluse, the papers are calling him now. He built a vast fortune, but he never sought the limelight. His greatest regret, the one true sorrow of his life, stemmed from a choice he made when he was very young. I listened, my confusion mounting. What did any of this have to do with me? "When Arthur was just 19, Mr. Finch continued, his gaze steady on mine. "His sweetheart, a young woman he loved very much, became pregnant. They were children, really. Her family was staunchly religious, and the scandal would have ruined them. Under immense pressure, they made the heartbreaking decision to give their baby daughter up for a closed adoption." He let the words hang in the air. A story of youthful tragedy. A common one, perhaps, but I still couldn't see the connection. They went their separate ways. Arthur went on to build his empire, but he never married, never had other children. He spent the last 50 years of his life and a significant portion of his fortune searching for that lost daughter. He just wanted to know she was safe, that she'd had a good life. Alistair Finch leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "A few years ago he finally found her, or rather, he found her records. Her name was Sophia. She had been adopted by a loving couple. She had grown up, married a man named Marco Rossi, and had become a talented artist. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sophia and Marco Rossi, my parents. My mother, Sophia, had died of cancer when I was 12. My father, Marco, a passionate but struggling musician, had died in a car accident just after I started college. My mother, I whispered, my voice hoarse. She always wondered about her birth parents. She searched for years, but with a closed adoption back then. I know, Mr. Finch said softly. Arthur learned that too, and it broke his heart. Because by the time he found her, it was too late. Sophia had already passed away. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. Tears for my mother, for the reunion she never had, for the grandfather I never knew existed. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture so vast and unbelievable I could barely comprehend it. But in finding Sophia, Mr. Finch said, his kind eyes holding mine, he found you, Isabella. He explained that for the last year, Arthur had been watching me from a distance. He had hired private investigators, not to intrude, but to understand. He knew about my career, my passion for art, a passion, Mr. Finch noted, that I shared with my mother and my grandfather, who had been a prolific collector. He knew about my marriage to Ethan. He knew about the divorce, about Ethan's cruelty and financial control. He had seen my strength, my resilience, my quiet dignity in the face of it all. He didn't want to disrupt your life, to appear out of the blue and cause a shock, Mr. Finch said. He was trying to find the right way, the right time to approach you. He was ill, you see. He knew his time was short. He wrote you letters, dozens of them, that he never sent. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single familiar-looking cream-colored envelope. It was identical to the one I had received. This one, however, was sealed and simply had Isabella written on the front in a strong, slightly shaky hand. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur Blackwood," he said, his voice now formal. He broke the seal and unfolded the document. He cleared his throat and began to read. There were bequests to charities, endowments for museums, and a generous pension for his small household staff. And then came the final staggering clause. All the remainder of my estate, including all properties real and personal, all stocks, bonds and securities, and my controlling interest in Blackwood Industries, I leave to my sole surviving heir, my beloved granddaughter, Isabella Sophia Rossi. The words seemed to echo in the vast, silent office. I stared at him, my mind a complete blank. It was like he had spoken in a foreign language. Controlling interest, Blackwood Industries. It meant nothing. Mr. Finch must have seen the incomprehension on my face. He put the will down and looked at me, his expression a mixture of sympathy and gravity. "Isabella," he said gently, "do you understand what this means?" I shook my head, mute. Arthur Blackwood was one of the wealthiest men in the country. His net worth is estimated to be in the billions. Billion. The word was an absurdity. It was a number so large it was meaningless. It was a concept from movies, from headlines, not from the life of a woman who was worried about making next month's rent. I started to laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy or amusement. It was a hysterical, unhinged sound that was half sob. It was the sound of a mind breaking under the sheer, crushing weight of an impossible reality. I, Isabella Rossi, the woman my ex-husband had just discarded as worthless, had just inherited a fortune. The game had just changed. And the board had been flipped over so violently that no one, least of all me, knew where the pieces would land. Leaving the offices of Blackwood and Finch felt like stepping out of a hyperbaric chamber into a different atmosphere. The clamor of downtown Chicago, the rumble of the L train overhead, the impatient blare of taxi horns, it all sounded muted, distant, as if I were listening to it through water. I walked for blocks without any sense of direction, my feet moving on autopilot while my mind reeled, trying to process the seismic shock that had just upended my world. Billionaire. The word was a foreign object lodged in my brain, too big and sharp to be absorbed. It didn't feel real. How could it be? Just yesterday I was counting the loose change in my purse to see if I had enough for a coffee. Today I was this, a number with 9 zeros. When I finally made it back to my small beige apartment, the place felt alien. The wobbly kitchen table, the second-hand sofa, the chipped coffee mug in the sink. They were artifacts from a life that was no longer mine. I felt a strange sense of dislocation, like a ghost haunting my own recent past. I sat on the floor, my back against the cool wall, and opened the file Mr. Finch had given me. It wasn't just legal documents, it was a life. It was my grandfather's life. There were photographs of a handsome young man with kind, sad eyes. There were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my mother, Sophia. They were filled with a lifetime of regret, of love for a daughter he never knew. "My dearest Sophia," one began, "today you would have been 52. I wonder if your hair has streaks of grey. I wonder if you still have the same laugh I remember from the one photograph of you I possess, a grainy image from your high school yearbook. Do you paint? Are you happy?" There is not a day that goes by that I do not ask these questions to the silence. I read through the night, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't just inheriting a fortune, I was inheriting a family. I was discovering a history I never knew I had, a story of love, loss, and a deep, abiding grief. I felt an overwhelming sorrow for my mother, who had died feeling like an orphan, never knowing she was the beloved, long-lost daughter of a man who would have moved mountains for her. And I felt a profound grief for Arthur, the grandfather I would never meet, a man who had lived a life of immense wealth but profound emotional poverty, all because of one youthful, heartbreaking decision. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale grey light through my window, the shock had begun to recede, replaced by a bewildering mix of emotions, grief, anger, and a terrifying sense of responsibility. This wasn't just money. It was a legacy. And then my world exploded. Mr. Finch had warned me that the news would break eventually, but I hadn't anticipated the speed or the ferocity. A financial journalist, tipped off by a source inside the probate court, ran the story. The reclusive billionaire's secret granddaughter, an unknown art curator, inherits the Blackwood fortune. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, began to buzz and chime with a relentless, frantic energy. It was a cacophony of notifications, each one a digital intrusion into my fragile state of shock. First came the reporters, local news, national outlets, British tabloids. They were relentless, calling, texting, emailing. "Ms. Rossi, a moment of your time. Can you confirm the inheritance? How does it feel to be the Cinderella heiress?" That was the moniker they settled on, the Cinderella heiress. A fairy tale narrative that stripped away all the grief and complexity, reducing my story to a cheap, sensational headline. Then came the friends, people I hadn't heard from in years, old college roommates, former colleagues, distant cousins I'd met once at a wedding. Their messages were cloyingly sweet, full of false nostalgia and thinly veiled opportunism. "Izzy, oh my God, I just heard. We have to catch up." "Bella, darling, I was just thinking about you the other day." Financial advisors, wealth managers, and hedge fund managers materialized out of thin air, all promising to protect and grow my newfound fortune. Their emails filled my inbox, a digital swarm of sharks circling the scent of blood in the water. It was overwhelming, suffocating. My small apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage, with the entire world pressing in on me. I turned off my phone, unplugged my laptop. I drew the blinds, plunging the room into a semi-darkness, and sat in the silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a terrifying sense of vertigo. I had spent the last year feeling invisible, discarded. Now I was hyper-visible, a commodity to be analyzed, judged, and exploited. My identity was being rewritten by strangers, my personal tragedy twisted into a public spectacle. In the midst of the chaos, one thought kept rising to the surface, a cold, hard stone in the churning sea of my emotions. Ethan, what would he think when he saw the news? I could picture his face perfectly, the initial disbelief, followed by a wave of sputtering, incandescent rage. The woman he had deemed worthless, The woman he had cast aside for a younger, shinier model was now exponentially wealthier than he could ever dream of being. His carefully constructed world, where he was the victor and I was the vanquished, had been utterly demolished. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been annihilated by a nuclear blast. A part of me, a dark, vindictive part I was ashamed to acknowledge, savored the thought of his humiliation, but a larger part of me felt a cold dread. Ethan was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. His ego was a fragile, monstrous thing. He would not let this go. I was no longer just Isabella Rossi, the struggling art curator. I was the Cinderella heiress. And I had a terrifying feeling that my story was far from over. The world was watching, and I had no idea what to do next. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was utterly, completely alone. The chaos of the outside world forced my hand. Within 48 hours, my Pilsen apartment had become untenable. Paparazzi were camped out on the sidewalk, their long-lensed cameras pointed at my windows like sniper rifles. My neighbors, initially curious, were now openly hostile about the disruption. I was a prisoner in my own home. Alistair Finch, bless his calm, paternal presence, arranged everything. A discreet security team whisked me away in the dead of night to a sprawling suite at the Peninsula Hotel, registered under a false name. It was a world of hushed corridors, impeccable service, and bulletproof windows overlooking the city. The luxury was obscene, a stark contrast to my previous life, but the anonymity it provided was a lifeline. It was a gilded cage, but for now it was a safe one. For the first few days, I did nothing but exist. I ordered room service, took long baths in the marble tub, and stared out at the city lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the world below. Alistair visited daily, bringing not just legal documents but sandwiches from his favorite deli and a quiet, steadying presence. He didn't push. He let me process, let me grieve for the family I'd just found and lost, and let me acclimate to the sheer, terrifying scale of my new reality. Blackwood Industries wasn't just a company, it was an empire. It had interests in renewable energy, biotechnology, real estate, and global logistics. The portfolio was dizzying. Alistair began walking me through it, simplifying the complex structures, explaining the philanthropic arms my grandfather had established, and outlining the key players on the executive board. Arthur trusted his team, Alistair explained one afternoon as we sat in the suite's living area, surrounded by financial reports. But he always maintained final authority. Now, that authority is yours, Isabella. The weight of that statement was crushing. I was an art curator. My expertise was in 17th century Dutch painters, not 21st century corporate governance. I don't know how to do any of this, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not qualified. Arthur didn't choose you for your financial acumen, Alistair said gently. He chose you for your character. He saw your intelligence, your integrity, your resilience. He believed you had a strong moral compass. That, my dear, is more important than any MBA. His faith in me was a fragile, flickering candle in the darkness of my self-doubt. I clung to it. I started to read, to study. I devoured the reports, my grandfather's private journals, and the detailed notes he'd left for me. A picture began to emerge of a brilliant, principled man who wielded his immense power with a quiet, thoughtful sense of responsibility. He wasn't a predator like Ethan. He was a builder. It was during one of these late-night study sessions, poring over a file on recent acquisitions, that I saw it. A name that made the blood freeze in my veins. Knight Capital Partners. Ethan's firm. My heart began to beat a frantic, heavy rhythm. Blackwood Industries was a major client of the bank where Ethan was a senior partner. They had handled several large transactions for my grandfather's company over the last few years. With trembling hands, I dug deeper into the file. It detailed a hostile takeover that Knight Capital had orchestrated on behalf of Blackwood Industries 6 months prior. The target was a smaller, innovative green energy company called Solara Innovations. I remembered reading about it at the time. Solara had been on the verge of a breakthrough in solar panel efficiency. They were a darling of the environmental tech world. Then, suddenly, they were gone, swallowed whole by a larger, unseen entity. The deal had been notoriously brutal. Knight Capital, spearheaded by Ethan, had used every predatory tactic in the book, driving down stock prices, launching a smear campaign against Solara's CEO, and ultimately forcing them into a sale at a fraction of their worth. The CEO, a brilliant scientist named Dr. Aris Thorne, had been financially and professionally ruined. I had never connected it to Ethan at the time. He had been vague, mentioning only a big, aggressive deal that was making him a fortune in bonuses. Seeing it laid out in black and white, his name, his strategy, the brutal outcome, made me feel sick. This was the man I had shared a bed with. But then I found something else. Tucked into the back of the file was a separate folder containing my grandfather's private notes. His handwriting was elegant but forceful. He had been investigating the Solara deal himself. Finch. One note read, "Look into the Knight Capital acquisition of Solara. The methods are distasteful, predatory, not how we do business. Hayes's team seems to have acted with an unusual degree of autonomy. Something isn't right here." Another note was even more chilling. "Ethan Hayes, my granddaughter's husband. Is this a coincidence? I cannot afford coincidences. This man's reputation is one of unchecked ambition. I fear he has used his connection to me, however indirect, to his advantage." My grandfather had known. He had seen Ethan for exactly who he was, and he had been on the verge of doing something about it. In that moment, everything crystallized. This wasn't about revenge, not in the petty, emotional sense. I didn't want to simply hurt Ethan. That would make me no better than him. This was about justice. It was about rectifying a wrong that had been done, not just to Dr. Thorne and his company, but to the very principles my grandfather had lived by. The inheritance was not a cudgel to beat my ex-husband with. It was a shield and a sword. It was the tool I would use to honor Arthur Blackwood's legacy. My purpose, once a murky, terrifying void, was now crystal clear. I picked up the phone and called Alistair, my voice steady, my resolve like steel. "Alistair," I said, "I need you to schedule a meeting for me. Not with the board of Blackwood Industries, with the board of Knight Capital Partners." The Knight Capital Partners boardroom was a shrine to masculine ego. Dark wood, brushed steel, and a ridiculously long table that could have seated a medieval war council. It was the heart of Ethan's kingdom, a place where he had held court, made fortunes, and destroyed lives. Today, I was walking into the heart of the beast. I was not the same woman who had signed those divorce papers 2 weeks ago. That woman was a ghost, a pale imitation of herself. The woman who walked through the double doors of that boardroom was Isabella Rossi, chairwoman of Blackwood Industries. I had spent the last 3 days preparing with Alistair and a hand-picked team of Blackwood's top legal and financial analysts. We had combed through every detail of the Solara acquisition. We had mapped out Ethan's strategy, his back-channel dealings, the ethical and potentially legal lines he had crossed. I was armed not with emotion, but with facts, figures, and an unshakable sense of purpose. My entrance caused a ripple of confusion. The board members, a collection of silver-haired, pin-striped men, were expecting a routine quarterly review. They were not expecting me. And they certainly weren't expecting to see Ethan Hayes, their golden boy, their most aggressive deal-maker, turn a ghastly shade of white. He was standing at the head of the table when I walked in, flanked by Alistair and 2 of my lawyers. His mouth opened slightly, a flicker of sheer, unadulterated shock in his eyes. He had seen the headlines, of course. The world had seen them. But to him, I was still just Izzy, the naive artist. He probably imagined I was off on a shopping spree on Rodeo Drive, frittering away my fortune. He never, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined I would be here, in his boardroom, in his world. A stuffy-looking man I recognized from my research as the firm's CEO, Marcus Thorne, rose to his feet. "Ms. Rossi, this is an unexpected surprise. We weren't aware you would be joining us." "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice calm and clear, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm here today in my capacity as the new head of Blackwood Industries, your firm's largest client. I believe a matter of some urgency requires our immediate attention." I walked to the empty chair directly opposite Ethan and sat down, placing my leather-bound folio on the table with a quiet, definitive thud. Alistair and my team took their places beside me. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so palpably, it was almost a physical force. Ethan finally found his voice. It was strained, tight. Isabella, what is this? If you have some issue, you should have called me." I met his gaze across the gleaming expanse of the table. The man I had once loved, the man I had once feared. Now, I felt nothing but a cold, clear resolve. "This isn't a personal matter, Ethan," I said, my tone crisp and professional. "This is business, specifically the business of Blackwood Industries' recent acquisition of Solara Innovations, a deal you personally oversaw." A nervous murmur went through the room. The other partners shifted in their expensive chairs, exchanging uneasy glances. "That was a highly successful acquisition," Ethan blustered, trying to regain his footing. "One of the most profitable deals of the last fiscal year." "Profitable for whom, exactly?" I countered, opening my folio. "It was certainly profitable for you, with your record-breaking bonus. It was profitable for this firm. But it was achieved through methods that Blackwood Industries finds ethically questionable and reputationally damaging." I proceeded to lay it out, point by brutal point. I used the very corporate jargon he had once wielded like a weapon to make me feel small. I spoke of due diligence, fiduciary responsibility, and brand integrity. I detailed the smear campaign against Solara's CEO, providing evidence of planted news articles and paid online trolls. I outlined how Knight Capital had leveraged its inside knowledge of Blackwood's interest to short-sell Solara's stock before the takeover was announced, a practice that bordered on market manipulation. With every sentence, the color drained further from Ethan's face. The mask of confident charm was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked fury. He was being dismantled, piece by piece, in front of the very men whose respect he craved above all else. "Therefore," I concluded, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't know I possessed, "Blackwood Industries is officially launching a full-scale independent audit of all transactions handled by Knight Capital Partners over the past 24 months, with a specific focus on the Solara takeover. We will be freezing all current and future business with this firm until the audit is complete." Silence. A thick, stunned silence filled the room. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a declaration of war. Losing the Blackwood account would be a catastrophic blow to the firm. And then a small jarring sound broke the tension, a soft click-clack of heels on marble. The boardroom doors opened again, and Chloe Sterling glided in, a bright, oblivious smile on her face. She was carrying a shopping bag from Chanel. "Ethan, darling, sorry to interrupt," she chirped, "but I was just next door and I thought—" She trailed off, her smile faltering as she took in the scene. The grim-faced board members, my formidable legal team, and Ethan, who looked like he had just seen a ghost. Her eyes finally landed on me, sitting at the table as if I owned the place. Her perfectly made-up face registered a flicker of confusion, then dawning horror. She had walked in expecting to witness another of her fiancé's triumphs. Instead, she had stumbled upon his public execution, and for the first time she saw the cracks in the foundation of the powerful man she had attached herself to. She saw weakness, Ethan stared at her, his expression a mixture of fury and humiliation. Her presence was the final ridiculous indignity in his unraveling. I closed my folio. "We will be in touch, gentlemen." I stood up and walked out of the room, my team following in my wake. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the wreckage I had left behind. The game had been played, and for the first time in my life, I had won. The pristine, minimalist penthouse that had once been my prison now became Ethan's. It was a showroom of a home, all white leather, chrome and glass, designed to impress, not to comfort. Now, its cold, clean lines seemed to mock him, reflecting his own unraveling. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was swift and brutal. The news of the Blackwood Industries audit sent shockwaves through the financial community. Knight Capital's stock took a nosedive. Ethan's partners, men who had clapped him on the back and shared cigars with him to celebrate the Solara deal, were now treating him like a leper. They were distancing themselves, protecting their own interests, preparing to offer him up as a sacrificial lamb to appease their most important client. The pressure cooker of his life was reaching a critical point, and the mask of the charming, invincible Ethan Hayes was beginning to crack and peel away. The man underneath was someone I had only seen in glimpses during our marriage, a man consumed by a terrifying, narcissistic rage. Chloe was the primary target of this newfound fury. She, who had been chosen for her decorative qualities, was now a witness to his humiliation, and he couldn't stand it. "What the hell were you thinking?" he screamed at her the night after the board meeting, his voice echoing in the cavernous, empty space of their living room. He threw his briefcase against a wall, scattering papers across the white marble floor. "Waltzing in there with your shopping bags like a brainless idiot? Did you want to make me look even more pathetic?" Chloe, who was used to being praised and pampered, flinched. Her entire life strategy had been to attach herself to a powerful man, to be the beautiful, supportive partner to a winner. She had no playbook for this. "I didn't know, Ethan," she cried, her voice thin and reedy. "How was I supposed to know she would be there? Your ex-wife. What is she even doing?" "What is she doing?" Ethan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She's trying to destroy me, that's what she's doing. The pathetic little curator I picked up out of the dust, and she thinks she can destroy me." He began to pace, a caged tiger, his movements jerky and violent. "It's that old man, Finch. He's pulling the strings. She's not smart enough to have come up with this on her own. She probably can't even balance her own checkbook." But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt had clearly taken root. The woman he'd seen in that boardroom was not the woman he had divorced. That woman had been poised, articulate, and utterly in command. She had wielded his own language against him with a surgeon's precision. He had created a narrative of her weakness for so long that he had come to believe it himself. Now, that narrative had been shattered, and the cognitive dissonance was driving him mad. Over the next week, things deteriorated. The preliminary findings of the audit were leaked to the press, detailing the unethical tactics used in the Solara deal. Ethan was placed on indefinite leave from the firm. His calls to his partners went unanswered. His world, once a universe that revolved around him, was rapidly shrinking. He drank heavily, his days a blur of expensive scotch and bitter, rambling monologues. He lashed out at Chloe for the smallest things, the way she loaded the dishwasher, the sound of her typing on her phone, her very presence in the room. His charm was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate cruelty. Chloe watched him, her calculating mind whirring. She had hitchhiked her wagon to a star, but the star was plummeting to earth in a ball of flames. Her attraction to him had been entirely based on his power, his status, his wealth. With those things gone, what was left? A bitter, angry, defeated man. A liability. She started making quiet preparations. She spent her days not shopping on Michigan Avenue, but in discreet meetings in quiet coffee shops. One was with a publicist to discuss how to manage the narrative of her breakup with a high-profile, disgraced financier. The other, more important meeting was with one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in Chicago. Chloe was a product of a superficial, transactional world, and she was nothing if not a pragmatist. She was preparing to cut her losses and move on. One evening, she came home to find Ethan sitting in the dark, a half-empty bottle of Macallan on the glass table beside him. "Where have you been?" he slurred, his eyes red-rimmed. "I was out with friends," she lied smoothly. He looked at her, a strange, pathetic expression on his face. It was a desperate plea for something: reassurance, loyalty, pity. "They're going to fire me, Chloe. They're going to take everything." For a moment, a flicker of something, perhaps genuine sympathy, crossed her face. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a cool, hard assessment of the situation. This was her moment to pivot. "Well, Ethan," she said, her voice devoid of its usual bubbly affectation, "maybe you should have thought about that before you underestimated your ex-wife." She walked past him, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor, and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Ethan was left alone in the darkness, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. He had lost his company, he had lost his reputation, and now he had lost his prize. He was utterly, completely alone, a king deposed in his own cold, empty castle. And the architect of his destruction was the one person in the world he had been so certain he had already defeated. While Ethan's world was imploding, I was stepping into a new one. Alistair arranged for me to visit my grandfather's estate, a place I now owned but had never seen. It wasn't a flashy, modern mansion like the one Ethan coveted. It was a historic stone manor nestled on a sprawling wooded property in Lake Forest, an hour north of the city. It was a place of quiet, understated elegance, a home that had been lived in and loved for generations. Walking through the front door was like stepping back in time. The air smelled of old books, beeswax, and a faint trace of the pipe tobacco my grandfather had smoked. The house was filled not with trendy designer furniture, but with comfortable, well-loved pieces, family photographs and art, so much art. My grandfather, it turned out, had been a collector of immense taste and passion. The walls were lined with paintings I had only ever seen in museums: a small, moody whistler, a vibrant Cassatt, a preparatory sketch by Degas. My curator's heart ached with a bittersweet joy. This was a language I understood. This was a part of him that felt instantly familiar. Alistair had given me the key to his private study. It was a sanctuary, a room lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves, a large worn leather armchair positioned by a stone fireplace. This was the heart of the man, and it was here I began to truly find him. I found his journals, decades of them, filled with his elegant, spidery script. He wrote about his business deals, his travels, his thoughts on philosophy and politics. But mostly he wrote about his daughter, Sophia, my mother. He wrote about his search for her, his hopes, his fears, his profound and unending regret. I saw a young woman today who looked like her, one entry from 1985 read. She had the same dark, curly hair I remember from her baby picture. For a moment, my heart stopped. I almost called out her name. But it wasn't her. It's never her. Reading his words, I felt the chasm of my own grief widen, but it was also filled with a new, profound sense of connection. This house was not just a collection of assets, it was a repository of my family's history, my history. As the audit of Knight Capital proceeded, uncovering more and more of Ethan's reckless and unethical dealings, my perspective began to shift. My initial righteous anger was slowly being replaced by something else. Watching Ethan's life crumble from a distance was not bringing me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt sad, empty. Destroying him was not the answer. That was his way of thinking, his zero-sum game of winners and losers. My grandfather had been a builder, not a destroyer. I realized the true power of my inheritance wasn't as a weapon to punish Ethan, but as a tool to build something better. My redemption arc, I understood now, was not about triumphing over my ex-husband. It was about moving beyond him entirely. It was about defining my own legacy. I called a meeting with Alistair and the Blackwood legal team. I had a new plan. "I don't want to sue Knight Capital into oblivion," I announced, much to their surprise. "And I don't want to see Ethan in jail. I want to use the leverage from this audit to force a resolution." My plan was twofold. First, Knight Capital, under the threat of both a lawsuit from Blackwood and a potential SEC investigation, would be forced to fund a complete restitution package for Solara Innovations. They would provide the capital to relaunch the company, restore the original shareholders, and return its brilliant CEO, Dr. Aris Thorne, to his rightful position. They would make right what they had so brutally broken. Second, I wanted to create something new, something that would honor both my mother's memory and my own passions. I told them I was establishing the Sophia Rossi Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting emerging artists and funding arts education programs in underserved Chicago schools. It would be endowed with an initial $50 million from the Blackwood estate. It was my own dream, the one Ethan had belittled for a decade, now being realized on a scale I could never have imagined. It was a way to give back, to create beauty and opportunity, to turn the pain of the past into a promise for the future. Alistair Finch looked at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. "Arthur would have been so incredibly proud of you, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Standing in my grandfather's study, surrounded by his books, his art, and his memory, I finally felt like I was home. I was no longer just Arthur Blackwood's heir or Ethan Hayes's ex-wife. I was Isabella Rossi, and I was just beginning to discover who that woman was. She was not a victim. She was not a fairy tale princess. She was the architect of her own life, and she was finally ready to start building. The request for a meeting came through Alistair, a formal, almost pathetic plea. Ethan wanted to see me, alone. No lawyers, no pretense. I agreed, choosing a neutral location, a quiet corner table at a high-end restaurant in a hotel where neither of us had ever been. It was a place with no history, no ghosts. He arrived looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. His expensive suit hung on him. His face was gaunt, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, defeated slump. He looked older, smaller. Chloe had left him, a fact I'd learned from a short, pitying article in a gossip column. His firm had forced his resignation, giving him a severance package that was generous by normal standards, but an insult by his. He was a pariah in the world that had once worshipped him. He sat down opposite me, avoiding my eyes. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands, resting on the crisp white tablecloth. "Isabella," he finally said, his voice raspy, I don't even know what to say." I waited, silent. I was not here to absolve him, nor to gloat. I was here to close a chapter. "I know you think I'm a monster," he continued, finally looking up. His eyes were bloodshot, desperate. "And maybe I am. I got so caught up in the game, in winning, I lost track of everything else. Of you." He tried to summon some of the old charm, the manipulative sincerity that had once worked so well on me. "I think about us, you know, the good times, Italy, that little apartment we had in Lincoln Park, before all of this madness." He was appealing to our shared history, trying to find a crack in my armor, a way back to the woman he thought he could control, but that woman was gone forever. "That was a long time ago, Ethan," I said, my voice even, devoid of the anger or pain that had once consumed me. "We're not those people anymore." "But I could be again," he pleaded, leaning forward. This has been a wake-up call. You've woken me up, Izzy. Maybe this is a second chance for us. You have everything now. We could have everything." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his suggestion almost made me laugh. He still saw me not as a person, but as an asset he had lost, and now wanted to reacquire. "No, Ethan," I said, and the finality in my voice was absolute. "There is no us. There is no second chance. You are here because you want something, so let's stop the theatrics and get to it." His face fell, the pathetic mask of remorse replaced by a flicker of his old bitter anger. He had played his last card, and it had failed. I laid out the terms, the ones my lawyers had already presented to his. They were non-negotiable. His firm would proceed with the full restitution of Solara Innovations. He would issue a public apology to Dr. Aris Thorne, and he would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, promising to never contact me, speak of me, or come near me ever again. In exchange, I would not pursue personal legal action against him for his role in the takeover. "It's a generous offer, Ethan," I said, echoing the word he had thrown at me in that lawyer's office a lifetime ago. Considering the circumstances, he stared at me, the reality of his utter defeat finally sinking in. He had no moves left. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly checkmated. "You've really become him, you know," he spat, a last desperate attempt to wound me. "Your grandfather, cold, ruthless." I simply smiled, a small, sad smile. "No, Ethan, I've become me." He had nothing left to say. He nodded, a single jerky movement of surrender. He stood up, turned, and walked away without another word, a ghost disappearing from my life for good. I stayed for a moment, sipping my water, the silence of the restaurant a peaceful balm. I didn't feel triumph or hatred or even pity. I just felt quiet, a quiet sense of peace. Later that evening, I stood on the stone balcony of my grandfather's house, overlooking the vast, dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a river of diamonds. It was a world of immense power and wealth, a world that was now mine. But standing there in the cool night air, I knew that the money wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the discovery of a family I never knew I had. It was the chance to fulfill a dream I had almost abandoned. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of my own strength, my own worth, forged in the fires of betrayal and loss. I was not defined by the man who had left me, or even by the grandfather who had found me. I was Isabella Rossi, and my real story was just beginning. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that the end of one chapter is often the unexpected beginning of another. From the ashes of a painful divorce, she discovered a legacy she never knew existed and a strength she never knew she had. It wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming her power, her identity, and her future. If her journey from heartbreak to heiress resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribing for more tales of incredible transformation. What would you do with a second chance? Let us know in the comments below.